Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt like you needed to adjust yourself, your tone, your energy, even your personality, just to fit in? Maybe you've held back a reaction, forced a smile, or even played a role that wasn't really you. If so, you're not alone. It's not just social etiquette, it's something deeper. It's called social masking. For many of us, social masking becomes second nature. We do it at work, in friendships, in relationships, even with ourselves. But what happens when this becomes a survival mechanism rather than just a social skill? What happens when we lose sight of who we really are because we've spent so much time being who we think we're supposed to be? Welcome back to another Broken Podcast. I'm Nick Taylor, and today we're pulling back the curtain on social masking. We're going deep into what it is, why we do it, and how it affects our mental health, relationships, and overall sense of self. We'll also explore how social masking can lead to attracting toxic people, like manipulators and narcissists who thrive on the false personas that we create to survive. And of course, we'll discuss the science behind it all, why people with trauma, PTSD, anxiety, and depression are more likely to social mask, and most importantly, how we can break free from the cycle and start living authentically. If you've ever felt exhausted from pretending, if you've ever wondered why you feel disconnected from yourself, or if you just want a deeper understanding of the psychology of human behavior, you're definitely in the right place. Because this episode might just change the way that you see yourself and the world around you. Alright, so let's start with the basics. What exactly is social masking? Because let's be real, most of us do it to some degree, but we don't always recognize it for what it is. At its core, social masking is when we change or suppress parts of ourselves, our emotions, behaviors, even our personality, to fit into a situation or meet social expectations. It's putting on a socially acceptable face, even if it doesn't match how we truly feel inside. Think of it like wearing an emotional costume. At work, you might mask by acting more confident than you feel. In a relationship, you might suppress your true needs to keep the peace. Around certain friends or family, you might downplay your struggles because you don't want to seem too much or too sensitive. It's the constant adjusting, filtering, and performing just to be accepted. As I have done some self-reflection on how masking has impacted my own life, I see how deeply rooted I myself have been in the practice, even all the way back to childhood and my teenage years. The habit only grew and developed as I did into adulthood, and as I experienced more trauma, I dug myself so deeply into performing for others on a daily basis that it became my entire state of existence. Because it had been part of my life for so long, it wasn't until I reached a breaking point, tangled in an identity crisis, that I even realized it had taken over me. I decided to dig deep into this topic because I struggle with it myself, and it has exhausted me to a point where I can't even do it anymore. Being completely honest, I can't even handle social situations as an adult because I never learned how to just be myself in even the most simple of social situations. That has had detrimental effects on my life throughout the past year in all aspects of my life. Working, parenting, passive social, romantic, friendship, and even family. I ended up in a manic state once I myself saw the identity crisis masking had created. And once I began to see how deep the impact was on me, I began to identify so many relationships that I had built under that social mask that were not only not authentic, but were parasitic to my mental and emotional state. It left me feeling completely alone and not even understanding how I even got there. I always find having a deeper understanding of what we are doing and why we end up feeling the necessity to do these things to exist in society to better help me not only identify the problems itself, but to overcome it. So let's do just that. And hopefully both of us can leave here today with a better understanding of what social masking is so that we don't end up spending our entire lives hiding who we truly are. And can learn to just be ourselves so that the foundation of all our relationships in life aren't built under a mask of what we perceive everyone else desires. Now, social masking isn't just one thing. It shows up in different ways depending on the person and the situation. So let's break it down. Emotional masking is when we hide our real emotions and put up a front. Like when somebody asks how you're doing and you say, "I'm fine," even though you're drowning inside. It's that automatic smile when you don't actually feel okay. Over time, emotional masking can lead to deep exhaustion and even depression because you constantly are denying yourself the space to feel and express what's real. Personality masking happens when we adjust who we are based on who we're around. Maybe you become the funny one in the group, even when you don't feel like joking. Or maybe you just downplay your intelligence, creativity, or passions to avoid standing out. It's this subtle, sometimes unconscious shape-shifting to fit into different social circles. Situational masking is when we act different depending on our environment, like being one version of yourself at work, another with your friends, and yet another with your family. While some adaptation is normal, chronic situational masking can make you feel like you don't even know who you really are anymore. Now here's the tricky part. Social masking isn't always bad. In some cases, it's a necessary social skill. We all adjust our behavior to some extent. It's why we don't blurt out everything that we think in a business meeting, or why we don't have the same conversations with a stranger that you would with your best friend. But there's a fine line between healthy social adaptation and losing yourself in the process. The problem starts when masking becomes so automatic, so ingrained, that you feel like you can't be your real self anywhere. When you suppress your true emotions and needs for so long that you start to feel invisible, even to yourself. And that's where things start to get dangerous, because living in a constant state of social masking doesn't just affect your mental health, it also impacts your relationships, your confidence, and even the types of people that you attract into your life. Now that we understand what social masking is, let's get into the science behind it. Because this isn't just something we choose to do, it's often a deeply ingrained response driven by our brain, our past experiences, and even our biology. So why do we mask in the first place? A big part of that answer lies in our brain's survival mechanisms. Most of us are familiar with fight or flight mode, our brain's automatic reaction to danger. But what doesn't get talked about enough is the fawn response. And this is where masking comes in. Fawning is when instead of fighting or running, we people please or adapt excessively in order to stay safe. It's a survival tactic that helps us avoid conflict, rejection, or harm. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain responsible for social reasoning, decision making, and impulse control. When we mask, we're essentially using this area to regulate and filter our natural responses in order to conform to social expectations. It's why masking can be so mentally exhausting. Your brain is working overtime to suppress natural instincts and emotions. Here's where it gets interesting. Studies show that chronic masking, especially in high pressure or emotionally unsafe environments, leads to elevated cortisol levels. Cortisol is the body's primary stress hormone, and when it's constantly activated, it contributes to anxiety, depression, and emotional burnout. Masking isn't just a habit, it's often a response to a deeper psychological pattern. Researchers have found that people with PTSD, anxiety disorders, and depression are significantly more likely to engage in chronic masking. Why? Because masking often begins as a way to cope with past trauma. When someone has experienced trauma, whether it's childhood neglect, emotional abuse, bullying, or a toxic relationship, the brain becomes hypervigilant. It's constantly scanning for danger, and the one way to stay safe is to present a version of yourself that minimizes risk. You become who you think others want you to be in order to avoid rejection, criticism, or harm. People with social anxiety often develop masking behaviors early on in life. If you've ever replayed a conversation in your head 100 times after it happened, or worried that expressing your true feelings would push people away, you know what I'm talking about. The fear of judgment leads to constant self-editing, which over time can make it feel impossible to relax and be yourself. Depression is another major factor. Many people with depression mask by forcing themselves to appear fine, smiling, engaging in small talk, and pretending to function normally, even when they're struggling inside. This type of masking, often called smile depression, makes it harder for people to seek help because no one sees their suffering. Another area where masking has been widely studied is in the neurodivergent community, particularly among people with autism and ADHD. Research shows that autistic individuals often engage in a form of social camouflage, mimicking neurotypical behaviors to fit in. This can include forcing eye contact, suppressing natural stims, and adopting speech patterns that don't come naturally to them. The result? Higher rates of anxiety, burnout, and a struggle to maintain relationships. The same applies to many people with ADHD who may mask by overcompensating, suppressing impulsivity, or hiding struggles with executive dysfunction. And the big takeaway here is this: masking may work in the short term, but in the long term, it comes at a heavy cost to mental health and self-identity. So what happens when people mask for years or even decades? Studies have found that chronic masking is linked to higher levels of emotional exhaustion, identity confusion, and even dissociation. People start to feel like they don't know who they really are because they've spent so much time being what they think others want them to be. This is a place I know all too well from personal experience. This is why so many people who mask struggle with burnout, self-doubt, and an overwhelming sense of loneliness, even in relationships. The disconnect between the masked self and the true self creates an emotional and psychological gap that is hard to bridge. If any of this sounds familiar to you, I want you to know nothing is wrong with you. You are not weak. If you've been masking for survival, there's a reason. And the good news, there's a way out. With a better understanding of the science behind social masking, let's talk about what happens when masking becomes your default setting. Here's the hard truth. Chronic social masking isn't just exhausting, it erodes your mental health, damages your sense of self, and can leave you feeling disconnected from your own identity. Let's start with mental health, the bread and butter of this podcast. If you're constantly adjusting, filtering, or suppressing your true self, your brain is operating in a state of stress, sometimes without you even realizing it. One of the biggest links between masking and mental health is anxiety. When you mask, you're always second guessing, did I say the right thing? Was I too much? Did they like me? This constant social monitoring keeps the nervous system in a heightened state, leading to chronic anxiety, self-doubt, and overthinking. Over time, masking can also fuel depression. Why? Because when you're suppressing your true emotions day after day, it creates a deep sense of emotional numbness. You start feeling like no one really knows the real you. And if no one truly knows you, how can they truly love you? That isolation and inauthenticity can be crushing. Then there's the burnout factor. Studies show that people who mask, especially those in high-pressure jobs or emotionally demanding relationships, experience higher levels of emotional exhaustion. That isn't just feeling tired. This is a deep, soul-draining exhaustion that makes even simple social interactions feel overwhelming. But beyond mental health, there's a major cost of masking: losing your identity. If you've spent years adapting to what others want, what happens when you finally stop? Who are you underneath the mask? This is one of the biggest struggles people face when they try to unmask. They realize they don't even know what they actually like, want, or believe, because they've spent so much time molding themselves to fit external expectations. Many people who mask find themselves stuck in jobs, relationships, or lifestyles that don't actually align with who they are. They say yes when they mean no. They stay in situations that feel wrong because it's easier than being honest about what they truly want. And this, over time, leads to deep dissatisfaction and resentment. Another thing that happens with chronic masking is emotional suppression. If you're constantly filtering what you express, you may start to feel disconnected with your own emotions altogether. This is why some people describe feeling numb or like they're just going through the motions of life without really experiencing it. And here's something really important to understand. Masking and people-pleasing often go hand in hand. If you're someone who struggles with setting boundaries, speaking up, or asserting your own needs, chances are you've been masking as a survival strategy. A lot of us were conditioned, whether by family, society, or past experiences, to believe that being likable or easygoing is more important than being real. That keeping the peace is better than rocking the boat. But the problem is, when you make yourself so small for so long, you eventually disappear. For many people, masking is deeply tied to the fear of rejection. The belief that if they knew the real me, they wouldn't accept me. And unfortunately, when you're constantly living from that fear, you end up in relationships that are built on a false foundation. So what happens when you reach your breaking point? When you just can't keep the act up anymore? For some, the moment comes as a breakdown, suddenly realizing that they can't keep pretending. That definitely was the case for me. For others, it creeps up as resentment, exhaustion, or an overwhelming sense of dissatisfaction with life. But one way or another, masking always has a cost. This breaking point can actually be a gift, though, because when the mask cracks, you get the chance to rebuild, not into what society expects, but into who you actually are. And that's where the real healing begins. I want you to sit with this question. Where in my life am I masking, and why? Because once you start to see it, you can start to change it. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about next. How social masking affects your relationships and why it might be attracting the wrong people into your life. The effect masking has on relationships is where things get really interesting and really complicated. When you're masking, you're not just filtering yourself, you're also shaping the way that people see you. And that means the connections that you form might not actually be based on who you truly are. Think about it. If you're constantly adjusting to fit what other people want, are they really choosing you? Or are they just choosing the version of you that you've created to keep them comfortable? One of the biggest dangers of chronic social masking is that it leads to relationships that aren't built on authenticity, but on performance. And when a relationship, whether it's romantic, platonic, or professional, is built on a version of you that isn't real, it's only a matter of time before the cracks start to show. People who mask often feel lonely, even when they're surrounded by others. Why? Because deep down they know that the connection isn't fully real. If you've ever felt like no one truly gets you, or like your relationships feel emotionally shallow, masking might be playing a role in that. Here's the thing. Once you start a relationship by masking, it's hard to stop. You feel pressure to maintain the version of yourself that others have come to expect. And that is exhausting. Over time, this can lead to resentment, emotional exhaustion, or even withdrawal, because it feels like the only way to escape the mask is to escape the relationship itself. This is where things get even deeper. Masking doesn't just affect how you form relationships, it affects who you attract. And unfortunately, chronic masking can make you a magnet for narcissists, manipulators, and emotionally unavailable people. When you've spent years shaping yourself to fit others' needs, it becomes second nature to prioritize others over yourself. And guess who thrives in relationships where one person is always adjusting, always accommodating, and always giving? Narcissists and manipulators. They look for people who will bend, who will over-explain, who will do whatever it takes to maintain the relationship, even at their own expense. Many people who mask are starving for genuine emotional validation, and manipulative individuals pick up on that. They might start out by giving you the attention and approval that you crave, only to slowly pull it away, keeping you hooked in the cycle of seeking their validation. It's emotionally conditioning, and it's incredibly damaging. When you're used to suppressing your needs and making others comfortable, you're more likely to fall into codependent dynamics. You might find yourself constantly over-explaining, over-apologizing, or feeling responsible for someone else's emotions. And the more you mask, the harder it is to recognize when a relationship is actually harming you. Now let's say you've been masking for years, maybe even decades. The idea of dropping the mask in a relationship can feel terrifying. What if they don't really like you? What if they leave? What if being authentic means losing people? The truth is, when you start unmasking, some people will leave. But here's the more important truth. Those aren't your people. The ones who stay, the ones who love you for who you really are, that's where real connection begins. Unmasking forces you to confront a hard but necessary reality. Some relationships only exist because you've made yourself small for them. I understand this on a personal level because the person that I claim to be my best friend for well over a decade fit that mold. And while it's painful to realize, it's also freeing. Because once you stop performing, you stop attracting relationships that require you to perform. What does a healthy, authentic relationship actually feel like? Whether it's a friendship, a family bond, or a romantic partnership, here are a few signs that you are in a space where you can actually truly be yourself. You don't feel like you have to constantly monitor yourself. You feel seen even when you're struggling. You can express your emotions without fear of being too much. You don't have to over-explain or justify your feelings. You feel safe enough to be imperfect. In healthy relationships, you don't have to wear a mask. You don't have to shrink yourself, overthink every word, or worry about the real you not being enough. And that's what we should all be aiming for. If you've been listening and realize that masking has played a role in your relationships, don't panic. Awareness is the first step. The good news is you can start unmasking. It doesn't have to happen all at once. It can start with small moments of honesty, little steps towards showing up as yourself. We've unpacked the science, the mental toll, and how masking affects relationships. Let's talk about the most important part, how to break free from it. Because recognizing social masking is one thing, but actually unlearning it, that's where the real work begins. If you've been masking for years or even your entire life, the idea of unmasking can feel overwhelming. But the goal here isn't to rip the mask off overnight. It's to start making small, intentional changes that help you step into who you truly are without fear or guilt. Before you can unmask, you have to recognize when you're doing it. And sometimes masking is so automatic that you don't even realize it's happening. So here's a recap of a few signs that you might be masking in social situations. You constantly monitor your words and actions to avoid judgment. You feel mentally exhausted after social interactions. You say yes when you want to say no, just to keep the peace. You downplay your feelings or opinions to avoid making others uncomfortable. You feel like different versions of yourself around different people. You struggle to experience your emotions authentically. If any of these sound familiar, that's your first clue that masking has become a survival strategy. And the next step is figuring out why you feel the need to mask in the first place. Because masking doesn't just happen randomly. There's often a trigger such as fear, a past experience, or a deep-seated belief about what's acceptable. Ask yourself, when do I feel the strongest urge to mask? Who am I around when I feel like I can't be myself? What am I afraid will happen if I stop masking? For some, masking is tied to childhood experiences. Maybe you were taught that being quiet or agreeable was the only way to receive love. For others, it's about avoiding conflict, rejection, or social anxiety. Identifying these triggers helps you understand where the mask comes from, and that awareness is key to unlearning it. Let's be real. If you've spent years masking, suddenly dropping it in every situation might feel terrifying. So instead of forcing yourself into a major identity shift overnight, start small. Start in safe spaces. There are some ways to practice unmasking safely. Choose one person who you trust and practice being fully yourself around them. Allow yourself to have an opinion, even if others might not agree. Express an emotion in the moment instead of suppressing it. Wear something that reflects your true style, even if it's outside the norm. Engage in an activity you love, without worrying about how it looks to others. The key here is to take baby steps. The more you practice unmasking in small, low-risk situations, the easier it becomes to extend that authenticity into other areas of your life. One of the hardest parts of unmasking is learning to set boundaries, because if you've been masking to keep others comfortable, boundaries might feel like rejection. But here's the truth. Boundaries are not about pushing people away. They're about making space for yourself. Start by practicing these simple boundaries. Say no without over-explaining. You don't need an excuse to prioritize your own well-being. Pause before responding. If your instinct is to agree or comply, take a breath and ask yourself, do I actually want this? Allow yourself to be misunderstood. Not everyone will get you when you start showing up as your real self. And that's okay. Stop apologizing for having needs, opinions, or emotions. You don't need to shrink yourself to be worthy of love and respect. When you set boundaries, you'll quickly see who respects you and who only valued your compliance. And while that realization can be tough, it's also incredibly freeing. If you've been masking for a long time, you might feel like you've lost touch with who you really are. But the true version of you, it's still there. It just needs permission to come forward again. There are some ways to reconnect with your authentic self. Reflect on what genuinely excites you. What lights you up when no one's watching? Revisit childhood passions. What did you love before the world told you who to be? Journal or voice record your thoughts without a filter. See what comes out when you're not trying to perform. Spend time alone without distractions. No social media, no outside influences, just you and your thoughts. Surround yourself with people who celebrate, not suppress, your true self. Energy is contagious. Choose wisely. The more time you spend in alignment with your authentic self, the less tempting it becomes to slip back into masking. Because once you've experienced the freedom of being fully yourself, you don't want to trade that for anything. Breaking free from social masking is a journey. It's not something that you just wake up and fix one day. But every step that you take towards authenticity is a step towards a life that actually feels real. You don't have to be everything for everyone. You don't have to suppress parts of yourself to fit in. The people who are meant to be in your life will embrace you. Not the masked version of you, but the real you. And that's the kind of connection that lasts. We started this episode by talking about surviving the exhausting, isolating cycle of constantly adapting, performing, and suppressing your true self just to get by. But here's what I want you to take away from all of this. The authentic you is the best you, and you deserve to be that version of yourself. Living means stepping outside of the survival patterns that keep you small. It means unmasking, setting boundaries, reclaiming your identity, and realizing that you don't have to shapeshift for the world to accept you. The right people, they'll embrace you for exactly who you are. The wrong ones, we gotta let them go. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with something that you can actually do after listening to this episode. Pick one way. Just one, to practice unmasking this week. Maybe it's saying no without guilt. Maybe it's expressing an opinion without overthinking. Maybe it's simply allowing yourself to exist without adjusting for somebody else's comfort. Whatever it is, make it intentional. Take that step, because the more you unmask, the more you step into the life that you were actually meant to live. Listen, I know unmasking can feel scary. I know stepping out of survival mode feels uncertain. But I also know this, you are enough, exactly as you are. You don't have to be more agreeable, more polished, or more acceptable to be worthy of love, success, or happiness. You already are, so start small, and start today. And remember that you're never alone in this. So that's it for today's episode of Another Broken Podcast. If this episode resonates with you, share it with someone who you think needs to hear it. And if you've got thoughts, experiences, or just need a space to talk about your own journey with unmasking, you can find me on TikTok under the username Another Broken Dad or the account at BrokenMedia1984. You can also reach the show by emailing brokenmedia1984@gmail.com. Or you can comment on this episode. I'd just love to hear from you. We are stronger together. Take care of yourself, and remember, the authentic you is the best you.